All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another segment of the Jane Irrigation series. I'm Richard Restuccia, Vice President of Water Management Solutions for Jane Irrigation, and today we're going to be addressing an issue that I think almost all of us come across a couple times a year at least, and that's assessing a landscape irrigation system, especially when you come on to a new job, right? This is really a difficult issue. Sometimes even finding the point of contact, water meters, where the controller is, this all becomes a challenge. I remember a job about 5 years ago that we worked on, and there's a couple hundred controllers on the job, and we bid so much time to find the controllers. It actually took us a lot longer, and as a result, we had to rebid. So really, how you approach this from a labor standpoint, how you approach this from just a practical standpoint is very important. And a lot of us have different ways to do it. Fortunately, today we have a real expert in doing this, and that expert's Michael Derewenko. And I don't use that word expert in irrigation or landscaping very often, but I'm very comfortable using it with Michael. This is a gentleman who has worked as a contractor, is a contractor. He spent lots of time dealing with support to an irrigation manufacturer, and then working at ValleyCrest and Jane for the last 6 years. Michael's seen a lot and helped a lot of contractors assess new systems and figure out how to improve these systems, most importantly. So with that, I want to say welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate that you're giving us your expertise today in addressing such an important subject.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is something that, we've been trying to talk about for a long time. It's kind of what we thought was initially a select audience really isn't. Everyone either lives in an HOA, is part of an HOA board, or is a contractor, or, at some part of our industry comes in contact with a new site or a new account, and assessing the irrigation aspect of it is an easy win for, not only the customer, but for the contractor. So hopefully we can put this into, a 30 to 40 minute discussion and teach you some things where at least you can come to us with some informative questions, and hopefully we can guide you along. It's really a cool part of being a manufacturer's rep.
So yeah, definitely, especially this starting of a job. It's really oftentimes people come by, ask me, oh, will you come by and give me an assessment of my irrigation system, see how it looks. And you never know what you're getting into, right? You can look at a very old system, a relatively new. You really have to know what you're looking at, right, before you start.
You do. Customers, they have a lot of information for you. A lot of it isn't necessarily valid information, and so sifting through the valid information and finding what you really need to take on the account, add efficiency, and overall like a thriving landscape to it. Usually you're not doing an RFP when the previous contractor was doing an exceptional job. You're there because there's challenges that you need to overcome that your predecessor couldn't. So walking onto the site for the first time, or just bidding the site, there's some simple things that you could just know that without having to pull it out of them, or feel like you're having to extract information that the customer doesn't know, and maybe not make them feel as confident with their knowledge of the site. And so that's why we'd like to spotlight these things. I think they're pretty easy, and then they're just questions, easy check boxes basically when taking on a new account, information you don't need to pull out of the customer.
Yes, I just want to remind everybody too that we've got the Q&A open, as well as the chat box. So as we're going through this, if you have questions you'd like me to ask Michael, please put them in there, and I'll try to get to as many of them as I can throughout the session.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, should I start at the top, Richard?
Yeah, let's get going.
Okay. So the first thing, the way I like to think about it is, our water is always moving downhill. Ultimately, it's moving from a water supply that's typically under a road. I pulled up this illustration. Richard, can you just confirm you can see the illustration with the breakdown of everything?
Yeah, looks great.
So out here in the gray area, which is typically the road. Utility companies are gonna, they're gonna put our utility water mains under roads because that's something that they'll always have access to. They don't have to deal with private landowners basically to get to their utilities. And so off of that, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to figure out a way to charge us. They're going to put an odometer on that water supply, and that in our industry is the water meter. Water meters are going to be next to roads because they want to make it easy and efficient in the future for them to go and read or take readings off of to make sure the billing is accurate. And so knowing where your water meter, your supply is, we call it a POC or a point of connection in the landscape commercial industry. Knowing where your water is coming from, just in case there's a catastrophic event where you have to shut it down. A lot of times you walk with boards and account managers or property managers and just in advance saying, okay, this is where we shut off the water. If there's something, gives them a feeling of confidence that if there is something that happens, where to send someone to shut off. And so right off of the water meter is our backflow preventer. A backflow preventer is very simple. It basically stops the backflow of toxins that may be going down as fertilizers or pesticides that could be sucked back in through siphonage in the pop-ups or the drip line or any connection that goes out to the field. It could go into the water supply. And so we want some barrier of safety. And what we use is we use a backflow preventer. So these are simple things, and I'm going to spotlight a couple of them here in a second. As far as this illustration goes, our water supply is going to come off of the road. That's where our clean water supply is going to come. It's going to go into hopefully a pump that, maybe provides additional pressure for our larger system into our individual zone valves. And then we're going to have a controller that runs the whole system. It's the brain of the site. And so this is the general breakdown of an irrigation system. And so if you have like a 10,000 foot view in your head when you walk on a site, from where the water comes in and how it's distributed throughout the property, it's going to give you, once again, a feeling of confidence, and I think your customer as well.
So, Michael, I have a couple of questions on that last slide. So this, if you can go back one, please. So this is a pretty complex diagram. I think what we're seeing here is we're seeing drip lines, we're seeing rings around the trees. Can you tell us a little bit more about all that we're seeing?
For sure. So off of the backflow preventer, we're going to have a typical ball valve, a gate valve. That's a secondary shutoff after the backflow, just so the property, if it's your house, for instance, you have a way to shut it off where you're not trying to shut off the city meter. You have to keep in mind that if anything's broken on the primary side of a city meter, they're responsible, your utility provider. If it's broken on the secondary side, you're responsible. So if you go in to turn the secondary side of that meter off and you break something, they're going to take their time getting there to just turn it off because you're not supposed to be messing with it. So after that, this blue box, like I said, this is basically a booster pump. So if the water provider is not providing enough water or pressure or energy for your system, you're going to provide a pump that's going to add additional energy or pressure. And then it's going to go into these individual zone valves. And these zone valves are what we refer to as zone or station valves. And these are the ones you see in valve boxes around a commercial property or around your house. And then they're going to turn on and off as the controller wants them to, based on a predetermined schedule. And as the water is distributed over here, Richard, to your point, the tree rings, these are lines of emitter line that go around the trees. They're going to produce a very small, like a canopy of water on the soil that's going to allow the root bases to grow out. Some of the stuff on the left, the reason I think it looks a little overly technical is because we're trying to highlight all of our drip and high efficiency products. And so we have emitter line and, drip stakes and whatnot, and some subsurface drip as well here. So
Michael, this is the real challenge a lot of times, right? The pump station, I can find that easy. It's above the ground. A lot of this other stuff is underneath the ground and I can't see it. Is there an easy way to find it when you go on site?
No, but the valve boxes you can see, but that's why I can't stress enough. I mean, in all the years that I was searching in Florida, we have a very sandy soil. And so we're constantly searching and tracking for valves. And so once you've tracked valves for so long, you really learn that you have to keep in mind that as the person that was installing the system, it's usually A to B. Ideally, you're trying to go from one place, you're trying to dig one trench, you're trying to, anytime you can add an efficiency to the installation, you're doing that. And so when you see these buildings going in, and if they're block homes, you have to imagine they're trying to run a straight line. And so when you look at this illustration, I wish I had seen this kind of years ago. It really is that simple, but sometimes there's grade changes, there's driveways, there's pavers, there's things that obstruct the simplicity of what you see detailed in this illustration. But the way that things work in a linear fashion is all very similar across the whole country. I mean, obviously you get to places like Boston where you have like historic, brookstones in the common. The irrigation is going to come in through the basement. It's going to be a little different, but ultimately there's some form of pressure regulation, maybe filtration, a water meter. It's the same components, just in a different atmosphere, wherever they're at, but it's all these same components. And I think once you wrap your head around, you're just trying to identify these 4 or 5 components, it makes it way easier.
Yeah. So what about just coming onto the property and turning the valves on from the controller or manually at the valves? Is this a good way to find stuff?
Well, I mean, when you're let's get into this, because I think there's a good starting point. You have to be careful. If you open a valve box and you go to turn a solenoid to bleed that zone, and that solenoid breaks in your hand while you're standing there on a walk, you're not gonna look very good. So I would try to shy away from doing that. If you're doing a system assessment and you've gone to turn the zone on off the controller and it still hasn't turned on, then you can go out and try to figure out what's going on. I'm not a big fan of turning solenoids to bleed valves. Sorry, other manufacturers out there. I know we try to make it easy for customers, but I've just had too many brittle solenoids in my life where I go to turn them and then they just break off. And something that was very simple became very, very difficult because I didn't think it through. So
right. Plus, if your customer is there, you just lost a lot of confidence with your customer. They're like, well, who did I hire?
Yeah. I mean, besides opening a valve box in front of a customer, there's very little I will do, because you just never know, especially when taking on a new account, what kind of challenges you're confronting.
Yeah, we just had one quick question about the diagram, and that was the boxes next to the rings. What do those represent, the tree rings?
Okay, so as trees get bigger, you might not need tree rings if you're growing palms or something or once again in the Southeast where it rains every day at 2 o'clock. You might not. Palms don't really need tree rings. We put flood bubblers on them for the first few years to get the root base established, but then after that, they're going to find their water. So we do dual tree rings, especially if it's a new tree. And this is a way to turn them on and off. So inside that little valve box is an on off for those rings. And so as the tree matures, you could potentially turn them off and abandon the emitter line, or for maintenance purposes, you could turn it off. But we add those basically as basically it goes from PVC to emitter line too. So as opposed to just going into emitter line and not having a way to shut it off if something happened.
Yeah, real first class installation. You don't see it that often, but when you do, you really appreciate it, and so do the trees.
I mean, it goes back to like just worst case scenario. As we all know, drip irrigation has had a shadow over it for a long time because everyone is always confronted with it when they're trying to solve the problem. But it goes back to, if it was installed properly, like most things, you wouldn't be confronted with these problems that we're always confronted with drip. And this is one of them. Is someone's probably digging around the bottom of a tree. There's probably ground cover around it, and they don't see that tubing. And they're trying to figure out where the system's running, and they hit it. And then instead of having to go back to the controller to turn it off, there's a quick valve they can turn off. So it is kind of worst case scenario, but if you do it up front, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. So as I said, our water comes off of our main roads. It is really as simple as that when you're running giant, 16-inch iron tubes down the middle of the road. You want to come off of it logically from A to B. And so what I've highlighted in this slide is, is those 2 points of connection. And one is a water meter and one is a backflow preventer. And they're going to be right next to the road so the utility companies can come check them out and read them. And that's also going to be the point of shut off. So when your maintenance crews are on site, this is where they're going to be able to shut the sites down. Larger HOAs like this are going to have multiple points of connection because the utility provider needs to route water around the larger properties the best they can. And once again, the backflow preventers are also to try to keep toxins and anything that your yard or your bushes are confronted with that could potentially go back into the lines and be poison. Also,
I know a lot of HOAs have spent some good money, a good investment to have a contractor map out their points of connection, their meters, their valves, and their trees. And then they just have that map for all the contractors coming on. Just speeds the process. It's so much nicer.
Yeah. So, mapping a site, zoning a site out, as everybody knows, there's nothing better than opening up a controller and having a nice laminated zone map of where your water meters, your flow meters, and all your valves are. We haven't always been that fortunate, but fortunately, we have been fortunate that technology has caught up with us. And now, not only do they have like geotagging mapping systems where you can tag where valves are, POCs are, and then leave it with the site. So they have it. So when you come on a new site, somebody can just hand it over to you. There are some restrictions because as companies lose contracts, any money, or any value that they've put in to that effort of mapping it, sometimes they don't want to leave behind with the customer. It's something that kind of, as if you're part of a 2 or 3 year contract, that efficiency and that mapping that you've dedicated to that site is now invested with that in that relationship. And so if you pull out of that relationship, sometimes you lose that. So what we've done, is we allow in software to map out where controllers are. So in your irrigation software, it's embedded in that. So the end user, the customer, is now tied to that, that mapping, those mapping services through their subscription. So you've kind of taken the ball away from your contractor, but I think it's a good thing where as you potentially go through vendors over the years, you've always got that information about your site.
Yeah, great.
Checking a site's meter. The only reason I one in there is because I meters. And the reason this is because a lot of our retrofit opportunities down the road, and as you'll see, do we have a good connection, Richard? Sorry.
Yeah, we're all right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're good.
All right. So the only reason I even bring up the meter is because of ROI. And down the road is a lot of times when you're looking at potentially retrofitting a new site and adding smart controllers and flow sensors and something that's going to give you more data about the site and about the water usage and demand of a site, is all they're going to have is preliminary information, and that's going to be coming from a site's meter. This is our odometer that spins and that tells us how much water the site's been using, and that is going to be our reference point for how long it's going to take us to essentially make the customer their money back off of smart controller solutions, and any nozzles or whatever we're going to do. Ultimately, we have to have a reference point for existing water usage. And if they don't have flow sensors and a smart controller, which we're hoping to sell them, we're going to use the meter as telling us our reference point. And so it's always good to know where the meters are. Your irrigation techs or whoever's taking on the irrigation system should definitely know how to read a meter. And it's also good to have some idea of the local utility provider's tier watering system. They don't change them that often that it's that hard to stay on top of. Should always be something up on your bulletin board. There's nothing better than going into a board meeting and telling people how much they're spending on water in second and third and fourth tier, or second, third, I think there's a fourth tier, watering, and how substantial the spike is when they go into that higher water demand. And knowing those prices is going to help you, along with your water usage, come back with solid ROIs for retrofits.
Yeah, so Michael, how many jobs do you see that have separate meters for the outdoor water and the indoor water?
I mean, that's an ideal circumstance. Uh, that I don't want to say that's a California thing. I'm sure most legitimate installations have that. I can tell you, in my knowledge of seeing sites, it's not as popular as you want it to be. Um, I think, a lot of it came down to billing. I know in Florida, when reclaimed water or non-potable water became a resource, or out here, here in San Diego, we have the Poseidon plant that produces the water with no salt in it, the desal plant. So as it distributes it, that's great because you can always tap over, and now your outdoor water is tied into your reclaimed or your desal water. So I think that's the idea, is that you're designing down the road, is that if you ever have to move it off of there. Um, but it does come down to billing. I know they're putting meters on pumps in Florida now. So even pulling groundwater, you're essentially getting billed for at a reduced rate. So I think a lot of it comes down to billing, uh, as opposed to, trying to keep poisons out of the water. Unfortunately, does that make sense?
Yeah, so, and I know for me, I want to keep my outdoor water separate from my indoor water because one, there might be times I want to turn my indoor water off because my building's going to be vacant for a while, but I still need the outdoor. And then I really want to track how much I'm using outdoor. And then I don't want to be paying a sewer fee on the outdoor either. So, and now I know every case is different, right? And every property is unique, but is this something contractors can do? Add a separate meter for the outdoor that's relatively inexpensive for their customers?
Well, I mean, ideally for the customer, it's great. You're gonna have some labor of, the contractor is going to be ultimately responsible for just switching over, and probably adding a backflow and some of the components we've talked about. So there's going to be labor there, but uh, ultimately the utility provider is the one absorbing the expense. They're the one that's going to have to come out and put another tap on and put another meter on. They're going to evaluate this. You request it from the utility provider. You say, look, I have an irrigation system out here. I think it's big enough. As you mentioned, I don't think I should be paying that, which may or may not come into account. They're going to look at how much water you're using and how it's billing. If you're getting gouged on the price, and they deem it as like, a beautiful site on the corner of, somewhere where they think it's in their best interest, PR wise, to put it to, give you that break so you can continue watering it to keep it thriving. They're going to evaluate a lot of different things, but ultimately it's the utility provider that's coming out there that's going to have to put the meter in, and they're going to have to monitor the meter and bill on the meter. So they're going to have to see value in it. I don't think it's going to get done for everything. It's going to be something they look at.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a couple tips on here. The meters are billing by HCF, so you're billed on basically a block of water, 740 cubic feet, maybe 760. Um, and then so what, reading a water bill, we've done, I believe, different webinars on that, right, Richard, on how to read a water bill and break it down. So I didn't want to go into too much detail, but you should definitely know how to read your customer's water bill, because they're going to hand you a stack of them when you're taking over a new account. After you've taken on you're going on your first walk. One of the major things, I would say roughly half of what most new customers are going to talk about is going to be their irrigation, and what can they do to improve their irrigation and add efficiency to their system. And so locating what is existing there is going to be crucial. And I've spotlighted a couple things that you're going to look for. We want to look for controllers. They're the big, in California, they're the big stainless steel pedestals. In other parts of the country, they're usually wall mounted, or hidden. So when people are working on them, they're not on the middle of the open. They're not getting hit with sprinklers. They're not in the sun. Ultimately, there are computers now, and they're in a steel box, so they don't stay super cool. So we're going to try to put them in shade when possible. So you just need to identify where they're at. And once again, we don't want to run valves any further than we have to. So once you've located the controller, which is the brain and the heart of the system, the valves aren't going to be too far away. And then we're going to try to put the valves together. So knowing where your valves are on your site, knowing where your controller is, knowing where your sensors are, I put battery powered controllers on here because a lot of HOAs and commercial properties have front entrances with maybe 2 or 3 zones on them where they're just drip zones that have been added over the years, that have a battery powered controller on them. So if you come up on a new site and the entryway is dead and you can't figure out why because the controller looks good up the hill, a lot of times they just have battery powered controllers. Check the batteries in them, you can figure out if they're still working and keep the irrigation going. There's no reason you couldn't. Richard, do you have any questions about the rain sensors, flow sensors, anything on this page as far as identifying them goes, and maybe their
Yeah, I
functionality?
actually have a question from one of our viewers, and it's really interesting because I see a lot of wire on this slide, right? We've got the several wires. Oftentimes, I have bid jobs and not turned the irrigation on, and I've made the assumption that all the valves work, all the wire connections work. And then I've learned later on that that wasn't actually true. So what should people be doing when they bid the jobs to make sure that all the wiring is working? If they bid a job, assuming that it's working, and they get it to the job first day on the job and they find out they've got wire problems, how do you address this?
So I think when we were at ValleyCrest, we would actually do ohm tests we would go down the controller as we were bidding the site to make sure that there wasn't substantial wiring issues in the irrigation path. And so how much you want to gamble on that is up to you. A lot of it does come down to industry knowledge and just kind of being, as I mentioned earlier, when I'll open a valve box in front of a customer. I'll also open up valve boxes when asked to assess a system, because I'm going to look at wire connections. Are the valve boxes full of dirt? Does the valve look like it's in good condition? Is it a newer valve? If you open up, I would say roughly a dozen valve boxes on a site, regardless of size, I'll probably get yelled at that, but for the most part, a cross section of a dozen valve boxes. If you know somewhat about irrigation, just how electrical connections don't like water and dirt or wet dirt, you can figure it out. If it's been a well-installed site, if it's been a site that's been well-maintained, or if they've kept up on it. Also, the first thing that I usually ask customers is, when was the last time you had your controllers upgraded or looked at, or performed any irrigation upgrades and repairs on your site? Because there's going to be certain things that you don't have the time to look into, and you're going to have to rely on the customer. And that's going to be all localized knowledge, what they know about their particular site, not general knowledge of where their water meter is and things like this. Those are things that you can identify, but there are going to be some things that you're reliant on the customer to provide. And I always think that one of those things is, hey, what's the condition of your valves? Does everything seem like it turns on? Do you ever have any big dry spots? And if you do, where are they at? And then I also open the bottom of the controller, because you can tell a lot by the condition of the controller. Is it full of bugs? Your wiring connections down below are rusty, or there's a bunch of splices with non-waterproof connections. So as you look at those things, just keep in mind, like, does this look like the ideal environment that electricity should exist? And if it's not, it's usually not. And those are things that you have to take precaution with. And as you're bidding them, account for that, or at least let the customer know, hey, there's going to be some stuff that we're going to have to do when we take this site on to get it to the level that we want to be a part of this partnership.
Yeah, I've noticed two things. One, if there was a problem and we just had the conversation or discussion with the customer, usually the customer would, realize that we were right, that this is something we couldn't discover, and we were able to talk through it. The other thing is, I'm certain that at times I found customers were trying to hide things, hoping that I would bid it and then fix it for free. And man, when you get that sense, I've always thought, well, that's not really the customer I want to have.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's why you don't need to burden the customer or the time you're spending with them with, petty conversation or rhetorical conversation where's your water meter, where your controller's at. You need to ask them educated things. And what you need to ask them is, what's been the history of this site? And as you say, if they're not willing to divulge information that's going to make this system, make this relationship improve, not just continue to sustain and just flip through contractors year after year. You can tell a lot by a customer if in 5 years they've gone through 5 different maintenance companies. So I think there's a give and take. There's a compromise on both sides. I think the customer, if it's an HOA or commercial property manager, I think they have to be under the understanding that they're hiring a company that has to have a lot of different specific resources, very accurate, very seasonal, proactive. And so if you're not looking at those things, you're just looking to maintain. You have to question whether or not it's a partnership you want to be a part of, because it sounds like it's just going to lead to to more problems.
Yeah, that used to always throw people sometimes. We'd say, now, is this a job the customer wants us on?
Right.
Answer is yes. And then the next question is this a customer we want? Is this a job we want to be on? And you needed two yeses there. So, Michael, in your opinion, at some point, you're probably going to do a water audit on these properties. When and if is the proper time to suggest this and talk about it?
So a water audit. So once again, if you come up on a site and you're looking at turf areas and the turf in the shade is, is looking very bad, and the turf in the sun is looking good, and it's all in the same zone, which can happen a lot as trees grow taller, the shadows and the canopies, cast larger shadows. And so what happens is, where you might've had a nice, turf zone with a bunch of rotors, now you have shaded area and sunny area. And so, when you come up on a site like that, a lot of people are saying, well, we must have some uniformity issues with the heads. Let's get out here. But a lot of it does come down to light. You're now providing the same amount of water to areas in the sun and the shade, and it can create issues. And so identifying when you need to do a true water audit is probably crucial. This is also information that the site or the customer now owns. So it could potentially leave you, and they could take it, and they could, if they drop your contract in a year, they still have that knowledge, which is good. And so it's something that they need to pay for. I don't think that it's something that you should have to do to justify a retrofit. Maybe maybe people out there would argue with me, but I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I shouldn't have to, prove a poor DU rate in a spray zone to do a retrofit, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, Richard.
Yeah. Well, look, is there a way, to determine how much water should be used on a property before you come on site, or?
Yeah. So obviously we have like ideal precipitation and DU rates. We're trying to apply a certain amount of water. I think that definitely gets into to more specific. I don't think that's first walk assessing the irrigation system and coming on. I think there's it's probably more of a complex way to explain it. I think you have to definitely have a solid relationship with your customer where they're trusting you to go through and test the DU rate of their system and use catch cans and tell you exactly how inefficient their system is. I think there's a lot of how do you say, like easier stuff to do before you're doing that. I do know that those audits exist. If you're converting a 60-acre commercial property from conventional or traditional sprays over to streaming rotor nozzles, and they want to see the impact of that, and you're going to assess a couple zones and give them, the DU rate, a low DU rate, then I guess there is. But to me, that's more of what we're getting to here is, as you have specific retrofit opportunities on these sites that you've now had and formed a relationship with, you're going to say, all right, remember how we talked about retrofitting your system and how I was going to bring opportunities to you in our walk? Here's a great example of that. Let's get rid of all this traditional overhead. Let me do an audit. I'll show it. It'll make it easy to justify to your bosses, to your board. And then we'll come back with the ROI and the savings. But it's more of like a project oriented retrofit.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's really a thorough way to do it.
Yeah.
And so you have to, and it's time consuming. So either you have to be pretty sure you've won this bid, or you're on the job, or two, I know a lot of people who charge for it.
Yeah, you got to be willing to do it. It should definitely be a resource, or like, a service you should provide. I think on the first walk, the customer should be asking the question, hey, when you bring these retrofit opportunities to me, are you willing to, produce some science or justification to why we should do it to make my life easier, with the board or my boss. And then you say, yes, we can provide DU audit rates that show exactly how inefficient your system is. And then we'll show you how well we can improve that with this retrofit. And this is how much it's going to cost. And this is how much it's going to save. And I think that's more of like a retrofit opportunity than it is just a general walk and an assessment of the property.
Yes. So Michael, in your experience, was there so if you had $100,000 maintenance account, was there a goal or a target of how much irrigation retrofit business you should be generating out of that account on an annual basis? This is important for two reasons. One, to help contractors target where they should be. And two, one thing I see that's a shame is that many homeowners associations are never accruing money for improvements in their irrigation system. So 20 years down the road, when they need to do a lot of retrofits, because not just to save water, but they have to, they don't have the money there. So, what is the right percentage?
From a customer standpoint or from a contractor standpoint?
Oh, yeah, both. I mean, I think they should be pretty close or pretty even.
Yeah. So some older properties, a lot of the HOAs we come across that are 20, 30 years old, you should be looking at upwards. If you're switching maintenance companies over and over, a lot of the times it's usually, it can be irrigation. If it's not just general lack of human connection, a lot of times it's irrigation because it is a very technical knowledge. And what can happen is, I think if your system needs attention and it needs attention, you can look at 15 to 20% of of the new company coming on, what you should be putting into irrigation. And the new company is going to take that into account because as contractors, irrigation, it's a technical kind of trait. And so it's a little higher bill, hopefully a higher margin it should be. And as a contractor, you should look at getting at least 10% out of any account. I mean, when you take on a new maintenance account, if you can't proactively quote out 10% irrigation, if not retrofits or repairs in a year, then you're doing your customer a disservice because it's just I find it very hard to believe wherever you're at in the country that the irrigation system doesn't need some form of attention, especially if it's a commercial site or an HOA where you're dealing with high foot traffic with large mowers going over valve boxes with broken heads and stuff. So 10% would be the low end. And as a board or a commercial property, don't be surprised if you're going to see repairs that are 20% of your yearly expense for maintenance, just because everything's way bigger on commercial property. So it tends to be more expensive and time consuming.
Yeah, those are great guidelines, Michael. Thank you.
Okay. So on this slide, I did very verbatim is exactly what it is. It's identifying retrofit opportunities. We're looking for areas, as I spoke of earlier, that are potentially shaded that weren't shaded before. And now's the opportunity to break them off of rotor zones and maybe put the stuff in the sun and subsurface and turn the stuff in the shade into drought tolerant landscaping or something that doesn't need as much overhead water. Also smart controller upgrades, anytime we can get off of localized weather sensors, so we're not reliant on simple rain and freeze clicks. We can actually take, satellite scheduling into account, or in this particular satellite weather, and then the controller will help with the scheduling. That's going to help add ROI to our retrofits as well. And then lastly, pressure regulation, streaming rotor nozzles. Anytime we can apply water slower, over a longer period of time at a slower, more accurate rate is ideal. So we're hoping that the combination of some smart weather controller technology and some low volume, high efficiency emission devices, kind of pair together to give you the ultimate ROI or the ultimate savings for your customer. And this is going to be true with residential, commercial, and HOA boards.
Yeah, I was watching the Irrigation Innovation Consortium's presentation yesterday on smart controllers, and they had good data that was showing that, proper operating smart controller could save over 25% of water, and then combining that with a good drip system, they were showing into the 50% versus a conventional controller and conventional overhead spray type system. So it was pretty encouraging to see.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So we talked about the percentage of basically effort that or time is money. And so we talk about 10%, we talk about 20%. Water management is going to be very much a thing of the future as we rely on irrigation contractors. If we don't have a separate water manager, especially for commercial sites, I mean, as I talk to more and more companies, the demand exists. It's just it's a very tedious. I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to make it sound bad because I love doing it. But at the end of the day, ultimately, you need to give your techs an hour to 2 hours to look at their sites remotely. Ideally, we want all our sites back on or online so we can remotely monitor them and keep an eye on things. And so at the end of the day, when you're done replacing valves, replacing heads, doing other things, running crews, you need to give yourself enough time where you can come back to your software dashboard and actually look at what's been going on. And that's when you're proactively going to reach out to your customers and tell them that they've got breaks or that they have high water usage. And that's what's going to set you apart from your competition. And so, we're having a great irrigation contractor is key. And very much in the very short future, we'll have water managers and companies that, they already do exist, but they'll exist more vastly, where they're just simply managing water through software. And so us as a manufacturer, it's our job to provide the right product for the right application, get it out there, the contractor to know their customer and know, the direction they want to take the system. And then ultimately for the contractor that takes the site on, to be able to water manage the site, given the resources available. And so also knowing how to present these things, the retrofit opportunities, also to present like what you've just done repair wise over the course of the month or the quarter when you're walking the property, is a little different from customers, from residential to commercial to HOA customers. A lot of what they're interested in is very similar. Everyone wants their yard to look nice or their property to look nice. And so curb appeal is going to be one of the first things that, they're looking at. But most property managers, hopefully checking that box for maintenance companies isn't very difficult. Keeping your customer's site looking nice with the budget they've provided is you're doing the best you can. And so it's going to be that next step, that next tier of proactivity where you're bringing opportunities to them to retrofit. And, they're going to want to know why and how. And we talked about the DU rate tests. And, fortunately, now we have a lot of controllers that provide flow reporting down to the individual zone. So we can tell you exactly where we're wasting water and where there's opportunities to save water.
Yeah, it's so true, right? In the old days, not that old ago, not that long ago, I would say, well, how do you hire an irrigation advisor? How do you hire one into your company? And somebody told me, just look for the guy with the glue on his pants. And although that's kind of funny and it shows the practical knowledge, boy, today you have to find the guy who's detail oriented. Because like you say, it's very methodical to go through these systems and make sure everything's okay, and then checking systems and using the right tools. There is a lot of detail to it, and that is what really can separate contractors apart from their competition.
Yeah, and most irrigation contractors that are gluing parts together, when you're doing new builds are great. If you've got glue on your pants, as most contractors out there will tell you, I loved putting in new systems because you're going to make them as perfect as you want. Putting in a new system, installing a new system from blueprint or from spec and whatnot is one part of irrigation. Absorbing somebody else's irrigation system that has just been manipulated over year after year by different contractors, different installation practices and repair practices, is really a whole different science, because things just change. There's so many variables. And, if you can take on a new site or you can take on a new system and take into basically account, like I said, worst case scenario, solenoid breaks off trying to bleed a valve, all these little things. I mean, if you can take that stuff into account up front and present it to your customer, there's not going to be any surprises. It's going to make the relationship that much better. And I think that just comes down to general site knowledge. And, hopefully those are some of the things we spotlighted here. And, as I have in this slide, there's some very simple things you can do to appeal to your customers where maybe you're lacking right now.
Yeah, no, this is all really good stuff here, and things that our customers are looking for, right? That's the other thing. I'm so interested in talking to customers, and they say, well, my old contractor didn't recommend any of these things. I don't even think they paid attention to them, they would say. And it's really something that customers want. So I'm really glad you're sharing this. Yeah,
very rarely have I seen boards or customers that are inundated with so much information that it's an issue, because most of the time this is one of many different challenges or responsibilities they're dealt with daily, and it makes their life so much easier. Where if their boss comes to them and asks why the flowers are dead out front, you can say, well, they were overwatered. Why were they overwatered? Here's why they were overwatered. And, we, go to our flow reports that we have down to the individual station. And we can tell you exactly down to the hour, how much water you used, and having that support is hopefully makes you feel more comfortable talking to your customer where you don't feel like you're going to be up for any surprises. And that's why like break control and having some idea of when something breaks, there's nothing better than emailing your customer first thing in the morning and saying, hey, you got a break out there. We'd like to get out there and fix it. And they're like, wow, okay, great. It's just that much that a lot of them are volunteer. It's one less thing they have to deal with on boards, and property managers don't want to be stressed out about breaks on their properties when they're managing a bunch of properties. And so that's why I ended this, Richard, with this last slide is these are some screen grabs from our software Unity that we use with our ET water controllers. These are smart controllers, and they provide what I think are very simple flow charts, usage reports where we can break it down to the day or to the month, and we can provide them to property managers, residential customers, a lot of growers. Any customer of any size gets a very simple usage report, and it tells them, that's what you're going to use to pinpoint where you can make your efficiencies to the system.
Yeah, so we have time for one last question. It was actually asked by two different people, so I think it's probably an important one to ask here last. But how, if I come onto a property, do I know if I need a booster pump or not?
So you would hope that booster pumps were installed when the system was installed. Obviously, grade changes. We lose a lot of pressure when we're moving water uphill. If a booster pump's not already on there and you have to add one, it's usually because the initial system was added to, or it wasn't installed properly. Maybe. When I came across systems that needed booster pumps, it was usually because they were pulling from a reservoir where the reservoir had gone lower. Maybe the water level had gone lower, that the well was pulling from, something that added a burden to the system where additional pressure was required. Sometimes we see this with our indoor growers. We don't have we're not able to run pipes along the ground and keep water level with the ground. We have to run it up and over walls or reroute it through indoor infrastructure. And so to do that there's some friction loss there. So we'll have to add a pump that after the process, as rooms are built out. So we'll see it on typical systems. If you're adding a booster pump, I can tell you in California, Richard, you probably know we have more pressure coming out of the gauge, the pumps than we need, the faucets than we need. So I know we don't have a problem with that, but when I did see it back east, it was usually because of reservoir issues or just basically some burden that was added to the system or demand that didn't previously exist. But ultimately, if you turn something on and you have low pressure, you need a booster pump. But very rarely does that just exist in a system that's like been around for a long time. It just loses pressure. That means your utility provider has dropped. That's usually not the case. Or maybe they've built on new homes in the area that have pulled off of the pressure. But that's very, very, very small chance. And if that's a utility provider complaint, that they'll probably adjust.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. You really shared some valuable information today that's based on your great experience in the industry for a lot of years now. I see you've got your email up. I know that people can reach out to you if they have additional questions or want some help on a job site, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the beauty. Once again, that's the beauty of what we do is, coming from contracting and still out there on the weekends doing my thing. It's really cool that we can work on both sides of it. We can work on product development, innovation. As we see issues on the field, we go back and we bring it to the Unity development team and they make flow reports easier to read, or, they bring it back. And so we work as the middleman between the field and the manufacturing really. And our vendors that are our landscape maintenance companies that take us in and bring us on walks. That's another thing that I could add is bringing a third party on that's not necessarily associated with you. When the landscape companies bring me in, I kind of sit back in the group, and I'm not, until I'm called upon, I don't really offer up my, volunteer what I have to say. And it's not always, partial to the group that I'm walking with. It's going to be very truthful, and you can learn a lot about a company when they bring a third party on that's willing to do that and kind of work as a neutral, voice for what's going on the site, especially a new site or a new walk. When we do those, they really seal the deal with the customer, knowing that they would bring somebody that could potentially bring a liable point up about them in the past, and doesn't, and says, look, this is the group that you want on. This is the one that's going to bring brevity to the future of your water management.
Yeah, no, great point. So anyway, again, thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to all the viewers today. We appreciate you taking your time of your lunch hour during the day. And hopefully we're bringing you guys good information. We certainly appreciate your time, and we want to do that. So thanks very much. Thank you, Michael. And we'll catch up with everybody on Friday. We're going to be doing something kind of similar. We're going to be talking about ag irrigation and how you assess the distribution uniformity of large ag growers. And Dr. Gowdy, Franklin Gowdy from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo is going to be helping us on Friday do that. So have a great rest of the week, everybody, and hopefully we'll see most of you back here on Friday. Thanks again, Michael.
No problem. Thanks, guys.